Crystal chandeliers cast a warm golden glow over the grand ballroom, reflecting off polished marble floors and gowns stitched with diamonds and silk. The charity gala was the kind of event where wealth whispered instead of shouted, where billion-dollar deals were made over champagne and reputations were carefully displayed for the cameras. At the center of it all stood Daniel Cross, a self-made millionaire admired for both his business genius and his carefully curated family image. Guests expected to see Daniel arrive with his pregnant wife, Elena Cross, whose elegance and grace had become as much a part of his brand as his success. But minutes passed, and Elena was nowhere in sight. Instead, Daniel appeared relaxed, confident, his arm draped around a stunning woman in a crimson gown. Her name was Vivian, and she carried herself like someone who believed she belonged there. Then it happened. In full view of investors, celebrities, and discreetly raised phones, Daniel leaned in and kissed Vivian. Not a polite peck, something intimate, deliberate, and unmistakable. Conversations froze mid-sentence. Glasses paused halfway to lips. Whispers spread like wildfire across the room as shock rippled through the crowd. At that exact moment, the ballroom doors opened. Elena stepped inside, 7 months pregnant, her hand resting gently on her belly. She took in the scene instantly, the kiss, the woman, the sudden hush. For a brief second, the room waited for her to break. But Elena didn't cry. She didn't turn away. Her expression remained calm, almost unreadable. She lifted her chin and walked forward, her heels clicking softly against the marble floor. Each step was steady, purposeful, powerful. Without looking at Daniel again, Elena made her way toward the stage. She reached the podium, wrapped her fingers around the microphone, and met the stunned crowd's gaze. In that moment, the gala stopped being about charity, wealth, or appearances. It became the stage for a reckoning no one in that room would ever forget. Before the gala, before the whispers and the kiss that shattered everything, Elena and Daniel Cross had been the kind of couple people admired from a distance. Their story was often told at dinners and interviews, how they met when Daniel was still chasing impossible dreams, how Elena stood beside him when success was uncertain and failure felt close. She had believed in him before the money, before the spotlight, before the world learned his name. As Daniel's business grew, so did the attention. Invitations, interviews, awards, and galas filled their calendar. Elena adapted seamlessly, learning how to smile for cameras, how to make donors feel heard, how to stand beside her husband without dimming his light. Behind closed doors, she managed their home, soothed his stress, and absorbed the quiet loneliness that came with being married to a man who belonged to everyone else first. When Elena became pregnant, the news was celebrated publicly as a perfect milestone. Headlines praised Daniel as a devoted husband and future father. Photos of them smiling hand in hand painted a picture of stability and happiness. But privately, something had already shifted. Daniel grew distant, distracted. He was present in body but absent in spirit. Conversations became shorter. Touch became rare. Elena noticed the changes but chose patience over suspicion. She told herself this was pressure, not betrayal. She reminded herself that marriages went through seasons, especially when success demanded so much. What she didn't know was that while she was preparing for motherhood, Daniel was indulging in a life that excluded her entirely. Looking back, Elena would later recognize how carefully the illusion had been maintained. The perfect image wasn't built on honesty, it was built on silence. And that silence had allowed betrayal to grow unnoticed, right up until the night it exploded under crystal chandeliers, in front of everyone who once believed in their fairy tale. Vivian stood beside Daniel as though she had every right to be there. Draped in silk and diamonds, she wore confidence like a second skin, her laughter ringing just loud enough to draw attention. She moved effortlessly through the crowd, greeting powerful men and women with the ease of someone who believed she belonged among them. To Vivian, the gala wasn't just an event, it was a stage, and she intended to shine. She leaned into Daniel often, her hand resting possessively on his arm, her smiles intimate and unbothered by the glances they attracted. Every whisper, every raised eyebrow only seemed to amuse her more. Vivian wasn't hiding. She didn't feel the need to. In her mind, she had already won. She believed Daniel's wealth, influence, and desire were enough to secure her position. Daniel, emboldened by status and admiration, didn't stop her. He basked in the attention, convinced that power protected him from consequences. The rules, he believed, were different for men like him. He mistook admiration for immunity, applause for approval. Across the room, Elena watched quietly. She didn't rush forward or confront them immediately. She observed every touch, every knowing smile, every subtle display of ownership. The betrayal unfolded not in secrecy, but in spectacle. What hurt most wasn't just the affair, it was the disrespect. The ease with which Vivian displayed him, and the arrogance with which Daniel allowed it. Elena felt the weight of the moment press against her chest, her pregnancy grounding her as emotions surged beneath the surface. She realized then that Vivian wasn't ashamed because she had been given permission, spoken or not, to exist in that space. In that instant, Elena understood the truth with painful clarity. This woman wasn't hiding in the shadows. She had been invited into the light. And the man Elena had trusted had not only betrayed her privately, but humiliated her publicly. For a brief moment, Elena felt the sting of disbelief tighten her chest, but it passed quickly, replaced by something far more powerful, clarity. Standing in the middle of the grand ballroom, surrounded by wealth and judgment disguised as curiosity, she realized that reacting emotionally would only give Daniel and Vivian exactly what they expected. Tears, confrontation, or retreat would confirm the role they had already assigned her. She refused to play it. Her pregnancy grounded her in a way nothing else could. The steady presence of the life growing inside her reminded her that this moment was bigger than humiliation. It was about dignity, legacy, and the example she would set for her child. As memories surfaced, late nights Daniel brushed her off, trips he insisted were work, the growing emotional distance, each unanswered question suddenly aligned into a brutal but undeniable truth. Elena's shock transformed into resolve. She straightened her shoulders and inhaled deeply, letting calm settle over her like armor. This room, filled with people who had admired her marriage from afar, would not witness her unraveling. If anything, they would witness her reclaiming control. She looked toward the stage and noticed the microphone resting at the podium. It stood there innocently, meant for speeches about generosity and success, never expecting to become a weapon of truth. Elena understood instantly what it represented, a voice, amplified and impossible to ignore. For years, she had been the supportive presence behind Daniel's image, silent and accommodating. Tonight, silence would only protect him. As whispers grew louder and eyes darted between Daniel, Vivian, and herself, Elena made her decision. She would not confront him privately later, where lies could soften the damage and excuses could blur reality. This betrayal had happened publicly. The response would be just as public, but measured, dignified, and devastating in its honesty. With calm precision, Elena began walking toward the stage. Each step felt deliberate, empowered. She wasn't acting out of revenge or rage. She was choosing truth over comfort, strength over shame. And as her hand reached for the microphone, Elena knew this moment would change everything, not just for Daniel, but for herself. Elena wrapped her fingers around the microphone, and the low hum of conversation dissolved into silence. Dozens of eyes fixed on her, some curious, some uncomfortable, some already sensing that something irreversible was about to happen. Daniel stiffened near the center of the room, his earlier confidence draining as he realized this was no impulsive reaction. This was deliberate. Elena didn't raise her voice. She didn't accuse or shout. Her calm tone carried farther than anger ever could. She began by thanking the organizers, the donors, and the guests for supporting causes that claimed to value integrity, family, and responsibility. The irony hung heavy in the air. A few guests shifted uneasily, already understanding where this was going. Then she spoke about truth. About how appearances are often carefully crafted, especially in rooms like this one. She spoke about standing beside someone through years of struggle, believing loyalty was mutual, believing respect was a given. Her hand rested briefly on her belly, a silent reminder of what was at stake. Without naming Vivian at first, Elena addressed betrayal, not as gossip, not as scandal, but as choice. She explained how betrayal isn't just an affair, it's the decision to humiliate, to lie, and to assume forgiveness is owed simply because power exists. Only then did she turn her gaze toward Daniel. The room seemed to hold its breath. Elena acknowledged that the kiss many had just witnessed wasn't a misunderstanding or a moment taken out of context. It was confirmation. Confirmation of a truth she had already come to accept. She made it clear she was not speaking as a victim begging for sympathy, but as a woman choosing dignity. Daniel tried to step forward, his mouth opening as if to interrupt, but Elena raised her hand slightly, not aggressively, just enough. He stopped. The power shift was undeniable. She ended simply. She said she would no longer protect a lie at the expense of her self-respect or her child's future. She thanked the audience for listening, placed the microphone back on the stand, and stepped away. The silence that followed was louder than applause. Daniel stood frozen, exposed not by rage, but by truth spoken calmly, publicly, and without apology. For several seconds after Elena stepped away from the stage, no one moved. The ballroom, once alive with laughter and clinking glasses, felt suspended in time. Then whispers erupted, spreading faster than the music that tried unsuccessfully to resume. Phones were no longer discreet, they were raised openly now, capturing the aftermath Daniel had never imagined facing. Daniel stood rigid, his face drained of color. The man who had commanded rooms with ease now looked small, unsure where to place his hands, where to look. He attempted to laugh it off, to lean toward a few familiar faces for reassurance, but none came to his rescue. Investors avoided his gaze. Donors turned away. The admiration he relied on evaporated in minutes. Vivian felt it too. The confident ease she had worn like armor shattered under the weight of judgment. She suddenly understood what Elena had known all along: public attention was not power. It was exposure. The whispers that once thrilled her now burned. She took a step back from Daniel instinctively, as if distance could shield her from the fallout. Security and staff moved carefully, unsure whether to intervene or simply observe the unraveling. The gala continued in form, but not in spirit. Conversations shifted from philanthropy to scandal, from admiration to disbelief. Elena did not look back. She walked out of the ballroom with the same calm dignity she had displayed on stage, her posture straight, her expression steady. Outside, the cool night air wrapped around her like relief. For the first time in a long while, she felt light, unburdened by secrets, lies, or the need to protect someone who had not protected her. Inside, Daniel remained surrounded yet utterly alone. The kiss that had seemed harmless minutes earlier now defined him. What Elena had done was not dramatic or cruel, it was honest. And honesty, delivered at the right moment, had stripped away every illusion he had relied on. In the days following the gala, the fallout spread far beyond the ballroom. News outlets picked up the story within hours, their headlines less interested in the scandal itself and more captivated by Elena's composure. Clips of her speech circulated online, praised for its restraint and strength. Comment sections filled with admiration, not for wealth or glamour, but for dignity in the face of betrayal. Daniel attempted damage control immediately. His public relations team issued statements about private matters and misunderstandings, but the words rang hollow. Sponsors quietly distanced themselves. Board members requested emergency meetings. The image Daniel had spent years crafting, devoted husband, ethical leader, had cracked, and no amount of money could seal it back together. Privately, his world was unraveling just as quickly. Phone calls went unanswered. Former allies suddenly became unavailable. The power he once wielded now felt conditional, fragile. For the first time, Daniel was forced to confront a truth he had avoided: success did not exempt him from consequences. Vivian faded from the spotlight almost as quickly as she had entered it. The confidence that once fueled her disappeared when attention turned judgmental. Invitations stopped. Messages went unread. She realized too late that she had never been seen as irreplaceable, only convenient. Elena, meanwhile, chose distance over drama. She consulted attorneys, not out of revenge, but preparation. She secured her finances, her future, and her child's stability with quiet precision. She declined interviews and refused to engage in public arguments. Silence, this time, worked in her favor. At home, Elena focused on healing. Surrounded by supportive friends and family, she allowed herself moments of grief without shame. She wasn't celebrating the collapse of her marriage, but she wasn't mourning her self-respect either. The gala had marked an ending, but it also marked a beginning. The world saw a scandal. Elena saw clarity. And clarity, once gained, could not be taken away. As weeks turned into months, Elena's life began to settle into a rhythm shaped by intention rather than reaction. Legal proceedings moved forward quietly, guided by experienced hands and well-documented truth. Daniel's attempts to regain control, both personally and professionally, were met with firm boundaries. What once would have intimidated Elena no longer did. She had already faced him at his most powerful and walked away unbroken. The legal reality was sobering for Daniel. Prenuptial clauses he had once dismissed worked against him. Financial transparency exposed decisions he had assumed would remain private. Each hearing stripped away another layer of entitlement. The man who once believed wealth could smooth over betrayal was learning that contracts, accountability, and public record did not bend to ego. Elena approached the process with calm resolve. Her focus remained on securing stability for her child and independence for herself. She didn't seek to punish, she sought fairness. That distinction shaped every choice she made, and it showed. Even those neutral to the situation couldn't deny the contrast between her measured approach and Daniel's visible frustration. Emotionally, Elena continued to heal. Therapy helped her unpack years of quiet compromise she had mistaken for love. She learned that loyalty should never require self-erasure. Each step forward reinforced a truth she wished she had known earlier: strength does not always announce itself, it reveals itself in endurance. Daniel, by contrast, faced consequences he could not negotiate away. His reputation lingered under a shadow that no rebranding campaign could fully erase. Meetings felt colder. Trust had to be rebuilt slowly, if at all. For Elena, the future felt open again. She prepared for motherhood surrounded by peace rather than tension. The betrayal that once threatened to define her had instead refined her. She was no longer reacting to someone else's choices, she was shaping her own life with clarity, confidence, and quiet power. Months later, Elena stood in her sunlit apartment, the soft glow of morning light spilling across the nursery she had meticulously prepared. The room, decorated in gentle pastels and filled with plush toys, reflected more than her taste, it reflected her triumph, her independence, and the new life she had built from the ruins of betrayal. Her child kicked gently, reminding her of the strength and hope growing inside her. Elena smiled, knowing that the path she had walked, the courage to face Daniel publicly, the strategy to secure her legal and financial independence, had not only protected her but created a foundation of security for the next generation. She had faced humiliation, betrayal, and public scrutiny, and she had emerged unshaken. Daniel's absence from her life was complete, but the echoes of his arrogance remained as lessons rather than scars. The man who had once believed he could dominate her with wealth, charm, and status had failed. His attempts to regain power were ineffective, met with polite firmness or complete silence. Even Vivian, who had thought herself untouchable, faded from relevance as Elena quietly reclaimed control over every aspect of her life. Friends and family, once distant observers, now became pillars of support, helping Elena embrace her role as a mother and as a woman whose dignity could not be shaken. She walked through her days with calm confidence, making decisions based on clarity rather than fear. The gala that had once threatened to define her now existed as a turning point in her story. It had revealed betrayal, but it had also illuminated strength, patience, and resolve. Elena knew the most powerful victories were quiet, they did not need applause or spectacle. She placed her hand on her belly, a serene smile crossing her face. The life ahead was hers to shape. The mistakes of others would not dictate her future. Elena had taken back her voice, her dignity, in her power, and in doing so, she had ensured a beginning filled with hope, courage, and unshakable independence.